You grew up watching these Nickelodeon stars become household names. Amanda Bynes made you laugh on all that. Drake Bell was your teenage crush on Drake and Josh. Jennette McCurdy seemed like the perfect girl next door on iCarly. But behind the slime and silly shows was a network that systematically destroyed childhoods for profit. And the evidence they tried to bury will make you never look at these shows the same way again. Let's start with the man at the center of it all. Dan Schneider. For over 2 decades, Schneider was Nickelodeon's golden boy, creating hit after hit. All That, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, Zoe 101, iCarly, Victorious. If you watched Nickelodeon in the 90s and 2000s, you were watching Dan Schneider's empire. But former stars are now speaking out about what really happened behind the scenes, and it's absolutely horrifying. Schneider had an obsession that everyone noticed, but nobody talked about: feet. Specifically, the feet of his underage female stars. Look back at any Nickelodeon show he produced, and you'll find dozens of scenes focusing on girls' bare feet. Characters getting their feet stuck in things, close-ups of toes, constant references to feet in dialogue. This wasn't accidental. This was a grown man incorporating his fetish into children's television, and nobody stopped him. But it gets worse. Schneider would regularly ask his young female stars to send him pictures of their feet for promotional purposes. He'd post these photos on his social media accounts, often with creepy captions. Amanda Bynes, Jennette McCurdy, Victoria Justice. They were all subjected to this exploitation while they were still minors. When staff members tried to raise concerns, they were fired or reassigned. The most devastating revelation comes from Jennette McCurdy herself. In her memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died, she exposed the truth about what Nickelodeon executives called the creator. McCurdy revealed that this unnamed executive, widely believed to be Schneider, offered her hush money to never speak publicly about her experiences at the network. They literally tried to buy her silence about the abuse she endured as a child. McCurdy described being forced into compromising situations, being photographed in ways that made her uncomfortable, and being manipulated by adults who controlled every aspect of her career. She was encouraged to drink alcohol while underage at network events, pressured to maintain an unhealthy body weight, and subjected to inappropriate comments about her appearance. This wasn't just poor management. This was systematic grooming disguised as career guidance. What's particularly sickening is how Nickelodeon executives enabled this behavior. They knew what was happening. Multiple complaints were filed, parents raised concerns, and other industry professionals tried to intervene. But Schneider's shows made the network hundreds of millions of dollars, so they looked the other way. They prioritized profits over protecting children. The network's response when accusations finally went public? They quietly pushed Schneider out in 2018, claiming it was due to budget constraints. No investigation, no public accountability, just a golden parachute and a carefully worded statement about creative differences. They hoped the problem would disappear along with Schneider, but the damage was already done. Amanda Bynes' story is particularly heartbreaking because we watched her destruction play out in real time. The bubbly, talented kid from All That transformed into a troubled young woman plagued by mental health issues, legal problems, and erratic behavior. But what we didn't know was that her breakdown began while she was still working for Nickelodeon. Bynes has spoken about being sexualized from a young age, being forced to perform skits that made her uncomfortable, and being surrounded by adults who saw her as a commodity rather than a child. She was working 60-hour weeks while other kids her age were in school, missing out on normal childhood experiences to generate content for the network's profit machine. The pressure to maintain her wholesome image while dealing with industry exploitation created a psychological fracture that never healed. Bynes began using drugs and alcohol to cope with the trauma. But instead of getting her help, network executives covered up her substance abuse to protect their investment. They enabled her self-destruction as long as she kept showing up to work. When Bynes finally had her public breakdown in 2010, Nickelodeon's response was to distance themselves from her completely. The same network that had exploited her for over a decade suddenly acted like they'd never heard of her. They erased her from their promotional materials, canceled her projects, and left her to deal with the consequences of their abuse alone. Drake Bell's recent arrest for child endangerment charges reveals another layer of this toxic culture. Bell, who starred in Drake and Josh and was a major Nickelodeon heartthrob, was sentenced to prison for inappropriate conduct with a minor. But here's what's truly disturbing. Multiple sources claim that Nickelodeon executives knew about Bell's problematic behavior with underage fans for years before his arrest. The pattern becomes clear when you look at other Nickelodeon stars. Alexa Nikolas from Zoe 101 has spoken about being bullied and sexually harassed on set, with adults in positions of power either participating in or ignoring the abuse. She's described a toxic work environment where child actors were treated as disposable commodities. Kel Mitchell from Kenan and Kel struggled with depression and substance abuse, later revealing that the pressures of child stardom nearly destroyed him. He's talked about feeling like a prisoner in his own career, unable to speak out about the exploitation because of strict contracts and non-disclosure agreements. Even stars who seem to escape relatively unscathed have hinted at dark experiences. Miranda Cosgrove from iCarly has made cryptic comments about things she can't talk about from her time at Nickelodeon. Ariana Grande, who became a global superstar after Victorious, has distanced herself completely from her Nickelodeon past, refusing to discuss those years in interviews. The most chilling aspect of all this is how systematically Nickelodeon covered it up. They had an entire legal department dedicated to managing child star scandals. NDAs were standard for everyone who worked with minors, not just the stars, but their parents, tutors, and chaperones. Anyone who tried to speak out was threatened with career destruction. The network also cultivated a public image of being the kid's choice: fun, innocent, and safe. They sponsored family-friendly events, partnered with children's charities, and positioned themselves as protectors of childhood innocence. This wholesome facade made it almost impossible for victims to speak out without being labeled as troublemakers or attention seekers. What makes this even more disturbing is that other industry professionals knew what was happening. Agents, managers, and executives at other networks all whispered about Nickelodeon's problem with child stars, but nobody took action. Hollywood's code of silence protected the predators while abandoning the victims. Parents were manipulated into compliance through promises of fame and fortune for their children. Many families moved across the country and sacrificed everything for their child's Nickelodeon career, making them financially dependent on the very system that was exploiting their kids. When parents did try to intervene, they were told they were being difficult and that other families would be happy to take their place. The tutors and chaperones who were supposed to protect child actors were often network employees more loyal to Nickelodeon than to the children's well-being. They were instructed to keep quiet about inappropriate behavior they witnessed and to report any problems directly to network executives rather than to parents or authorities. Even now, with multiple victims speaking out, Nickelodeon continues to minimize their role in this systematic abuse. They've released carefully worded statements about taking all allegations seriously while refusing to acknowledge the scope of the problem or compensate victims for the trauma they endured. The current generation of Nickelodeon stars seems to be following the same pattern. Young performers are still being subjected to inappropriate content, excessive work schedules, and adult supervision that prioritizes network profits over child welfare. The only difference is that social media now allows us to see the warning signs in real time. This isn't just about individual bad actors. This is about a corporate culture that views children as expendable resources. Nickelodeon built an empire on the backs of traumatized kids, and they're still profiting from that exploitation today through reruns, merchandise, and streaming rights. The most tragic part is how many talented young people had their lives destroyed by this system. We'll never know what Amanda Bynes might have achieved if she hadn't been exploited as a child. We'll never see the art that Jennette McCurdy might have created if she hadn't been traumatized by the industry that was supposed to nurture her talent. These weren't isolated incidents or unfortunate accidents. This was systematic abuse enabled by corporate greed and protected by legal intimidation. The adults who were supposed to protect these children instead treated them like products to be packaged, marketed, and discarded when they became inconvenient. What's perhaps most disturbing is that this is still happening. Right now, there are child actors working for Nickelodeon and other networks who are experiencing the same exploitation, the same manipulation, the same systematic abuse that destroyed the lives of previous generations of stars. The evidence is overwhelming, the pattern is undeniable, and the cover-up continues. Every time you see a former Nickelodeon star struggling with addiction, legal problems, or mental health issues, remember that these aren't personal failings. These are the predictable consequences of an industry that systematically destroys children for profit. The slime and silly jokes were just the distraction. The real Nickelodeon was a factory that turned innocent kids into damaged adults. And the executives who enabled this abuse are still collecting paychecks from the empire they built on childhood trauma. That's the dark truth they never wanted you to discover.